Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on our third seminar, LenZes. The person that will be talking now is our brand new colleague, Luca Mantegazza. He is a political economist by training, and he was an adjunct lecturer here at UF in the Department of Economics. Now at the One Health Center, he's our program coordinator, and he's particularly coordinating the Circular Health Initiative, and his main role is connecting stakeholders and find research synergies that could promote the idea of One Health. So what he's going to offer to us today is a view of the pandemic under an economical perspective. So thank you all for joining, and without further ado, Luca, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this talk, third LenZes talk. As Costanza already said, I'm an economist by training, and I thought today to talk about the disruptive effect of the pandemic on industries, to look not so much at the general impact on the economy, but what happens in certain specific industries, because there have been some quite interesting development. So to begin, of course, we know that general economy is not going well. Okay, real GDP is kind of cratering with respect to previous years. Unemployment claims have risen a lot in April and May, and then it's been slowing down, but they're still way above the normal level. Same thing for the unemployment rate in the country. However, is it not yet clear what is the cause of all of this impact on the economy? Okay, at the moment there are two main theory under consideration, answers to this question. One is the direct impact of COVID-19 on the economy, the pandemic stroke and the economic crater. Another answer is that there's an indirect effect. COVID-19 happened. Governments around the world had to implement public health responses to protect the lives of their citizens, and this indirectly affected the economy. However, the answer is often in economics is more complex. We can observe an indirect effect through public health responses, but several preliminary studies, because of course it's still too early to have definitive answer, identify different avenues through which the pandemic directly affected the economy. So the theory that is being developing right now is that even if there were no policies implemented by governments to reduce social, like physical meetings and the like, there would still be a major impact on the economy. And this raises three questions. Is this indirect effect, the mediated effect of the public health response on the economy, always negative? How is this direct effect developing from COVID-19 to the economy? How is the existence of this virus, of this sickness, directly affecting the performance of the economy? And finally, are these effects, both the direct and the indirect one, the same across all industries and sectors? So I will briefly go over question A and B, and then I will spend most of the time of this presentation on question C. So the public health policies had not had always negative impact. So preliminary studies that you can see here, please do not cite. So this is just a preliminary work from the Penn Wharton School of Business. This is another work published on Nature, showed that having this public health policies dramatically reduced the number of people that could have died from COVID-19. We're talking about millions of people. And this not only, of course, has a very important social, emotional, and psychological effect, but also an economic effect, because if suddenly there are 3 million less people working in the economy, this could have majorly disrupted entire businesses. At the same time, one of the preliminary results of this other paper says that aggressive and well-designed response in the early stages of the pandemic could have improved both epidemiological and economic outcomes over the medium terms, even when compared to a situation where there were no policies implemented. And also, the public policies implemented had not only a direct impact on COVID, but they also tried to mitigate the impacts, the economic impacts on the people, on the citizens of the different countries. Here I'm focusing on the US because we are a US-based university, but as you can see here, as long as the CARES Act was in effect, unemployed people, the blue line, spend more weekly than employed people. And the same could be seen for savings. So this means that the CARES Act had an impact, allowed people to maintain a level of consumption that was higher than what they would have had in the case with no support. Similarly here, the number of people in poverty, monthly poverty rates, we can see without the CARES Act, there would have been a giant spike immediately at the end of April, while thanks to the policies implemented, the increase in poverty rate has been slower and never achieved the super high rate that had been predicted. Now, what about this direct effect? How does COVID-19, the existence itself of COVID-19, directly affect the economy? Well, the main answer is that the fact that COVID exists directly affects people's behavior. So even if the government doesn't tell me to stay at home, even if there is not a lockdown, even if bars are not closed, many people would adjust their behavior, their customs, their routine in order to protect themselves and their loved ones from this virus. So here we have five main general effect on behavior that will discussed by Accenture, this is a firm analyst group. So there was a decline in confidence, and move to virtual business. Everything went virtual. Major increased attention to healthcare. So a lot of decisions now are based on what is the health impact? What should I eat? Where should I go? Which type of activity should I engage into? Where should I travel? Which company should I use to travel? So health becomes a very important factor in every decision making, while before it was not always such a high priority. Fourth one was cocooning. So a house, there was a rethinking of the house. It's not anymore something you go back after spending all day out, but it's a place where you spend most of your time every day. And so this has shifted a lot of consumption spending from outdoor activities to indoor activities, and also increasing spending in home renovation, furniture, and so on. And also this is more like related to public policies, the reinvention of authority. Clearly the necessity for government to intervene in managing the pandemics determined a shift in how people dealt with government. The government suddenly became more authoritarian, meaning had to enforce rules more forcibly. And it's still too early to know what will be the final effect, but we can expect two different outcomes. One's where the overall government intervention has been successful, that can lead to an increase, we can say, respect on the part of the population on policies implemented by the government that could have a positive outcome in the future, because new policies that could implement it to promote collective welfare would be followed more willingly. On the other hand, instead, if the government policies will be not successful, will worsen the current situation, this could result in a lack of authority, in a loss of authority on the part of the government, that could affect also long-term relationship of the citizens with the government. And clearly this outcome will depend geographically. Different governments are acting differently, different level of governments are acting differently, and so on. In this other graph here, instead, is a more targeted analysis, and this is the use of contactless payments. So these are all people that use a contactless form of payment for the first time during the pandemic. And we can see here that a great share of this new contactless payment user, are planning to keep using contactless form of payment. And this will greatly affect businesses, not only because not all businesses are equipped to provide contactless form of payment, but also because there are costs for businesses in providing this type of service. But now I want to focus more in depth on how are these effects different across industries and sector. So clearly, the impact of both the government policies and the COVID have not been the same across sectors. They have been diametrically opposed in many situations. So here you can see in this graph, then since January 31st through May 12th, Zoom increased its value to such a point that on May 12th, it was worth more than the 7 largest American airlines together. So clearly, this is a completely different trend for this two industry. IT communication actually gained a lot by the pandemic. So it's clearly everybody was staying at home, business had to shift to teleconferencing and so on, while the air travel industry suffered greatly because less people were willing to travel, because a lot of governments closed their borders or heavily reduced the possibility of coming from abroad, especially as tourists. Similarly, you can see here on the right, this is a graph about apps. So while certain apps, for example, here, they're all apps about online partying, online communication, online entertainment, so everything you can do from your house, have increased quite rapidly. Other apps, especially about the share economy, Airbnb, transportation, have seen quite a large decline in their use, both in their usage and in their usage and the number of user. So this is how often a single user used them, and this is how many new users were acquired during the period. And here is a more general representation, more example of what is happening for sales in retailing. And so we can see that some industries actually have improved their performance with respect to the previous year. Okay, non-store retailers is mostly online retailers, as expected. Online sales increase a lot. Building materials, garden materials increase a lot because, as we said before, there has been a rethinking of what a house is. So a lot of people have been investing more to make their apartments, their houses, their homes more comfortable since they're spending more time there. Also, everything that is related with outdoor activities like sporting goods, hobbies, musical instrument, books, since now there are less opportunities to entertain themselves together outside in like formal entertaining, like concert, movie theaters, and so on. Then some other industry here, again, furniture and furnishings. People are trying to set up their houses more comfortably. And then at the bottom hand, we see how clothing, gas station, restaurants and bar have seen a dramatic decline in their performance. Okay. So we can clearly see that there have been different impacts from COVID on different industries. Here, I mean, if you're interested, this is more in detail. This is the 10 best performing companies on S&P 500 in the first semester of 2020, and these are the 10 worst performing companies in the first semester. So you can see we have a lot of healthcare, information technology. They are call it consumer services of discretionary, but it's of course, again, is online entertainment, online shopping, and so on. And here we have a lot of Norwegian Cruises, Carnival, Royal Caribbean, United Airlines, so international traveling, and energy because people are not commuting anymore. There is less consumption of oil and gas in general. So how does COVID impact different industries? I identified 4 different ways in which COVID affected industry. In some cases, COVID acted as an accelerant. So there were certain trends that were already in place, but what was expected to happen in a long period of time, sometimes even decades, COVID acted as an accelerant. And so in a few months, we had an increase, an acceleration in the trend that corresponded to what we observed in the previous 10 years, okay? So for example, online entertainment, Disney Plus that came out during the pandemics acquired the same number of users as Netflix did in, I think, 1/10 of the time. So what Netflix achieved in several years, Disney Plus achieved in a few months. Same thing, malls and retail. The malls have been struggling to survive for many, many years now, at least since the 2008 recession. But with the coming of COVID, this trend has accelerated really fast. At the same time, in other industry, COVID acted as a changer. So what was a trend was completely reversed or heavily affected. So now the direction of certain industries shifted completely gold. So in this case, we have, for example, home spaces. I've talked quite a bit before. Grocery shopping, there has been a heavy shift online. But Walmart and Target, that are 2 main grocery sellers across the United States, have seen a gigantic increase in the share of grocery that are sold online. Same thing on learning. There has been a rethinking, especially for higher education, in universities, in high school, moving online. So a lot of colleges whose strength was in the quality of the campus experience, sometimes usually associated with higher bills, higher tuition fee, now are struggling because they cannot offer anymore that type of experience. But at the same time, it's very difficult to suddenly reduce the cost associated to tuition. And similar, there has been a surge in application for for-profit colleges. And this has led to a whole series of issues about the validity of the certificate you get at the end. There have been some issues with scamming. People say they were scammed by this university that didn't actually exist, and so on. Similarly, hotels. Hotels have been trying for years. The trend has been to fidelization, so like targeted care for the customer, extra luxuries, especially high-end hotels, welcome cocktails, dedicated cleaning services. In many high-end hotels, the custom was to clean the bedroom twice, in the morning and in the evening to prepare it for people going to bed. But this clearly now it's frowned upon. Customers do not want this anymore because cleaning twice a day means that people twice a day comes in your room and you do not know if these people are healthy or not. In other situations, instead, COVID acted as a catalyst. There were some industries that it was not really clear where they were going. They were trying different paths. Different companies were following different paths. And the coming of COVID helped to coalesce different companies on a single path. The path has been more effective in the current situation. So for example, urban transport for a long time has been a little bit, not a conflict, but different cities, different governments were struggling on the type of future transportation system they envision. So there was more focus on ride sharing, more focus on mass transit, more focus on biking and walking. Clearly, COVID heavily pointed at the importance of more than the importance of the non-resilience of mass transit, because clearly if there is a situation like COVID, illness that spreads in crowded places, mass transit would have to be completely rethought if we want to keep using it. And same thing for car sharing, Uber and Lyft. We will talk about it more in detail later. But clearly, I might be less willing to get into a car with another person I do not know when there is a risk I might be infected. And at the same time, biking, jogging has been increasing exponentially. In some cities in Europe, overnight, for example, in Paris, they created bike lanes by closing off whole streets to cars and other form of motor vehicles. Finally, in other situations, COVID has just been a disruptor. So there were industries that were happily chugging along in their trend, in their direction, and then suddenly they were hit. It's like they hit a brick wall, and they had to scramble to suddenly rethink what could they do. And here we have air travel. We will talk more in detail about it. The sharing economy, not only in the car sharing, but also in the house sharing, things sharing, every situation, workspace sharing, any situation where I have to share something with someone I do not know, it's a problem. People are more wary of doing that because you do not know who was using that thing before you. Coffee shops. With coffee shops, I mean all those shops that sell food mostly to workers. So you would go to work in your office, and then during the break, you would go downstairs and get a coffee, and get a bagel, get a sandwich, get a snack, or you would get something to eat on the commute back home. This has been this is a major issue in many cities, especially in London and New York and big metropolis with a large mass transportation system. And also advertising. Surprisingly, or maybe not, it depends how in depth you know the industries, but Google and Facebook have been struggling in bringing in companies willing to pay for advertising. Because if the general economy is not doing that well, suddenly a business model that rely on advertising to be successful struggles. Because if nobody's willing to advertise, nobody's willing to pay for the special package for targeting advertising, then all the data that you have collected as Facebook, as Amazon, as Google to provide targeted advertising becomes useless because nobody's willing to pay for that. So these are the 4 types of effect that I identified for COVID-19. So in certain cases, accelerated pre-existing trends. In other cases, it helped to focus the industries on a specific path that became suddenly more effective, more efficient in the current situation. It created major changes in certain industry, forcing a whole rethinking in the industry that still came out ahead. So it was a positive change. It helped the industry to become more effective. In other cases, instead, it was just a disruptor. So it left some companies completely clueless on how to keep going, or if not clueless, to suddenly having to change their business model to survive in the current situation. So now in the the second part and last of this presentation, I would like to bring to your attention some less obvious effect of COVID-19. These are mostly anecdotal. I looked newspapers, articles, and the like to look at those unusual or unexpected consequences of COVID-19 on the economy. Airlines has been heavily disrupted by the COVID-19 because clearly, if more people are unemployed, less people are making a lot of money. If there are border closure, if it's risky to travel, to stay in a confined space with other people for a long amount of time, less people want to travel. This is straightforward. But more things happen. So, for example, two of the companies that suffered the most from COVID are not airlines, but they are airplane producers. So both Airbus and Boeing are one of the worst performers on the stock exchange market. And also they are firing, they fire and furlough employees way before airlines moved ahead in the same direction. This is because to build like an airplane, it takes a very long time. And so usually companies place orders years in advance. But with the great uncertainty generated by COVID, not only companies are not putting in place new order, but they are even canceling early orders. And this has major disruptive effect on the aircraft manufacturers. At the same time, airlines relied heavily on very sophisticated pricing software. Some of the most valuable asset in an airlines company are their pricing software, because they're able to change, to adjust to the dollar tickets prices for different destinations in order to assure that no plane flight, I apologize, no airplane flies empty, but at the same time, there is no excessive overbooking, because that would be bad as well. The airline industry is one of the few industries where the supplier control both supply and demand. So the air companies both determine how many airplanes fly on a certain route, but also how much the ticket costs. And this determines how many people are willing to travel on that route. And so at the beginning of the pandemic, suddenly there was a huge decrease in reservations. A lot of people were not willing to travel. And so this pricing software, what they thought is like, okay, demand is going down. We need to fill up the airplanes, because it's not good to have empty airplane flying, because there are a lot of fixed costs about fuel, personnel, docking fees, and so on. And so a lot of this software, what they did, it was lowering the prices of tickets. So for a while in March and April, prices were super low. But then managers at these airlines company realized that this was not a good strategy, because during a pandemic, the only people that travels are the people that really needs to travel. And so their main concern is not so much how expensive the ticket is, but how safe it is traveling with a certain air company. And so now prices has been going up again. I mean, since end of April, beginning of May. But now a lot of experts in the sector are saying that they are not using anymore this software, pricing softwares, but they have to rely on their intuition. It's kind of going back 20 years, 30 years to before the computers were able to collect enough data on passenger preferences to optimally price different routes. Interesting, there has been an upsurge in the use of private jets. Of course, they're still very expensive, but during the pandemic, more and more people have been resorting to private jets. In some cases, even on private jet sharing, there are now companies that offer the possibility to book a place on a private jet. So it's kind of a sharing economy for private jets. But in this case, the thought process of many users is that it's better to risk spending a long period of time with 15 other people on a private jet rather than with 200 other people on a larger commercial plane. And so there has been an uptick in the use of private jet over the past few months. Another interesting result that really surprised me is that while passenger airlines are struggling, cargo airlines are struggling, but for a different reason. Because after the first few weeks of uncertainty and chaos, the air transport of goods and merchandise restarted pretty quickly. But the problem is that a lot of this merchandise, a lot of this cargo travels on passenger planes. But so with a lot of passenger planes being landed, a lot of passenger airlines reducing the number of flights, of daily flights, and in some cases canceling completely certain connection between countries, cargo companies struggled to find enough space to move all the merchandise they would like to move. So you can see in this graph, the percentage international cargo load factor is so much higher in July 2020 with respect to July 2019. Because the actual amount of merchandise that is transported on cargo-only planes is actually not that large. And since a lot of merchandise is transported using passenger airplanes, the fact that now there are way less passenger airplanes flying, it put a strain, especially in certain industries, on the air cargo companies. Finally, there has been a lack of weather forecast. I don't know how many of you know this, but all commercial airplanes are required to carry sensors and to record and transmit data about the weather. So the fact that so many less airplanes are flying daily has led to a lack of weather forecast, a lack of weather data, and certain areas being completely isolated because the data that you can catch from the satellites are not as finely detailed as the data you can collect from an airplane that is actually traveling through the area of interest. So this has been another consequence, effect of COVID-19. Another sector heavily affected by COVID-19 has been the fashion and retail industry. So this was a very funny article in the New York Times, Sweatpants Forever, that it was analyzing how there has been a major shift in the type of clothes that people are buying. And so companies selling casual apparel, home apparel, sweatpants, in fact, are doing fairly well. They are being pretty successful, especially if they were online stores to begin with. At the same time, instead, high-end, like fashion type of store are struggling a lot. And we saw how many large retailers, fashion, like high-end retailer, have been filing for bankruptcy. There has been a lot of issues with fashion weeks in Paris, in London, in New York, in Milan, and so on. Another industry sector that is struggling is the makeup industry. Because if I'm at home all the time, why do I need to use makeup? Why do I need to perform hair care and skincare routines? And even if I'm going outside, if I'm wearing a mask all day, then I will not really need to focus much on the lower part of my face. But probably, and this is actually being, there are some preliminary results that show it to actually be true, I will focus more on the upper half of my face. And particularly for women, there has been indeed an increase in sale of mascara, eyeliner, and all type of makeup related to the eyes, and a pretty large decrease in all makeup that is designed for the mouth and the cheeks, because it will often be covered by the mask. And so companies had to readjust. A lot of makeup companies had to readjust their, not just their marketing, not just their sales strategies, but also their production strategy, because it takes time to prepare a new line of product. And so suddenly a new line of products focusing heavily on lipsticks would have been completely out of place. It would have made no sense in the current situation. And this COVID-19 also accelerated, as we said before, not the destruction, but the change in the retail industry, with the mall idea losing more and more supporters. But then with the COVID-19, people started looking for new opportunities. And so in this article, again from the New York Times, the two businessmen teamed together to try to revitalize the mall industry in an interesting way. So one of the two is the owner of mall, is a mall owner. So he owns several malls across the country and used to lease retail space to stores. But then with more and more stores going bankrupt, for example, Sears a few years ago, he started having to fill up the stores by himself. So he teamed with this other businessman, whose job is to buy not failing companies, but failing brands. So this person, for example, just brought the brand for Brooks Brothers, just the logo, just the copy, like the trademark. And same thing with Forever 21. And so they can then use these brands to create new product to be sold in the malls. And this is an interesting approach to the mall problem that will lead from a situation where there was a mall owner and a store owner that would rent from the mall owner the retail space, to a situation where the mall owner is also the manager of the stores and then sells merchandise that is branded by this company, but there is no actual company behind the brand. This is, I think it will be a very interesting case study for the future. And remaining in mall, a lot of people, not a lot of people, but few hedge fund managers, few investors made a lot of money because they were betting on the demise of malls. And COVID accelerated so fast that they actually made a lot of money by betting that malls would go out of business. Another industry heavily affected by the COVID-19 is the hotels, the tourism industry. So as we were saying before, cleaning, so morning and evening cleaning in hotel rooms was considered an important perk in high-scale hotels. But now, instead, a lot of hotels are offering no cleaning option. So they said, we will clean the room before you arrive, and then we will clean it after you leave. So if you stay for multiple days, you can opt out from cleaning. This in order to reduce the possibility that someone infected will enter your room. And while this has been a winning strategy for some hotels, has had the side effect of putting into jeopardy a lot of works by cleaners, because if earlier cleaners were working every day cleaning all the rooms, now with less rooms to be cleaned, on top of the fact that there are less reservations at the hotels, hotels owners need less cleaners and less housekeepers to manage their hotels. Airbnb too, and in general, like the house sharing economy, has been heavily affected for similar reasons, because why would I want to go to someone else's house when there is the risk that that person might be infected and therefore put me at risk? And then this crisis brought to the forefront a lot of other issues that Airbnb was dealing with, for example, racial bias, over tourism, party crowd, and so on. And at the moment, the jury is still out to see whether hotels or Airbnb will prevail. So up to January and February, it seemed that Airbnb was the future and hotel were the past. Because Airbnb allowed for flexibility, allowed for a lot of things that hotels were not able to provide. But now hotels can rely on their brand name, they can rely on trained cleaning staff, they can rely on extra cash to implement additional cleaning and screening measures that Airbnb house owners cannot do. And so Airbnb is struggling at the moment. They have been furloughing some of the people, they actually fire some of their staff, and they're also be refocusing. They're letting go of a lot of side enterprises that they started in the past years, and they're focusing now just on house share. On the other hand, though, Airbnb has on its side the advantage that a lot of the facilities, a lot of the apartments and the houses that are rented through Airbnb are isolated. So you don't have to go into a lobby to check in. You do not have to use an elevator that other people use at the same time. So this is an advantage for Airbnb. And also Airbnb more easily can develop, can acquire new properties in the countryside and more remote location that now are more sought after than city center, tourist city, main cities where hotels are more prevalent. At the same time, some people are optimistic. I'm not, maybe not optimistic, but they see this huge hit suffered by the tourism industry as the possibility to rebuild in a better way, to restart from zero. And so to try to develop a form of tourism that is less stressful, less more eco-friendly, less damaging for the local people, the local social structures, and so on. So for example, during the past few months, several cities in Europe have passed regulation that to limit the amount of Airbnb apartments that could be rented in the city center of the house. This, in fact, the increasing number of Airbnb rentals in city center was linked to an increase in local rent prices because people found more profitable renting on Airbnb short term than renting long term to local citizens. And so, thanks in part to the pandemics, Airbnb was in a way distracted and was less able to lobby against this regulation. Similarly, I don't know, I'm from Italy, I've seen pictures and video from Venice during the summer. And while it was jarring from on one side, seeing the squares and the street empty in July and August when usually they're packed, on the other side was almost nice to see that there were the few tourists that were there were actually able to spend some time, where people that were staying there for the long time. They were not just like flying in or taking the train in, spend 6 hours running around and then leaving again. And a lot of locals were actually happy about this new situation. And this has been witnessed in many other tourist cities around the world. Talking a little bit more about Airbnb, while the Airbnb company is in no risk of failing due to the pandemics, a lot of the hosts of the people that rent their apartments and houses on Airbnb are struggling because over the years, a new category of entrepreneurs developed kind of piggybacking over Airbnb platform. So there were people that were not just renting their own spare room, or they had maybe an extra apartment they were renting, but were people that heavily invested. They got mortgages, they got loans in order to buy additional properties and then rent them on Airbnb and made them their main source of income. And while that was very profitable in the past, now they're struggling because since a lot of these loans and mortgages were commercial type of loans, they have less protection from the CARES Act and other government intervention that were passed in the past months. And in general, there have been a lot of struggle in this direction. And finally, this crisis of tourism is bringing to the forefront a lot of issues that have been kind of like swept under the rug in the past year. So with less or almost no travelers coming from Europe and the US in Africa, I apologize, local safari companies started offering heavily discounted tours to locals because clearly locals cannot afford the standard safari package that is priced for Western Europeans and North American tourists. But then a lot of local activists said, why are you coming to us right now? Do you really want us? Why haven't you started doing this earlier? Because despite the African middle class has been on the rise, has been expanding in the past decades, there's still been, most of the tourism industry in Africa is scattered toward foreigners, towards wealthy Americans and Europeans that can be charged very high prices to use the facilities in these countries. And so this is another unexpected, for me at least, effect of COVID. Finally, urban transportation industry, they have been heavily affected. So biking has been a success story during the pandemic. Bike stores have been doing great deals, so great that companies cannot produce enough bikes to be sold. This is a personal anecdote. My bike broke in August, and I had to wait a month for the piece. It was a little piece that I need to fix the bike would be available. Not because it was a special piece, not because it was a very expensive piece, just because there were not enough pieces to go around. And so this, it's been a great opportunity for this type of stores, but also moved forward, accelerated the transition to a more eco-friendly type of transportation. At the same time, the pandemic highlighted even more starkly all the problems that public transit has. Overcrowding, lack of cleanliness, issues with scheduling, safety issue. And so while on one side, this is again is a major issue. I don't know if you heard, but the MTA, the company that manages the public transit system in New York, has billions of dollars in losses over the past few months because not enough people are riding anymore. But at the same time, they cannot close because a lot of essential workers use the subway to go to work every day, to hospitals and nursing home and the like. At the same time, this is a possibility, an opportunity to rethink what do we want public transit to look like in the future? How can we build a more resilient public transit system around the world? And this opportunity, it's paired with a situation where borrowing money for a lot of government is extremely cheap because interest rates are so low at the moment that in some cases are negative, meaning that you have to pay in order to buy debt from the government. If you buy certain type of US Treasury bonds or German bonds, you actually pay for the privilege of owning them. And finally, going back to car sharing, both Uber and Lyft are struggling heavily. So I don't know how many of you were aware of it, but up to this year, neither Uber nor Lyft had made any profit. There's been no year since the creation of Uber and Lyft when they made a profit. So they were still working on investment capital. So they had investors that were financing these companies that were working at a loss, hoping that enough riders would use them and that they would become so popular they could displace the local taxi companies, they would become more popular than public transit and therefore become extremely profitable. Clearly with the pandemic, lockdowns, people are not moving as much, people are wary of using car sharing, and this resulted in an extreme losses for both Uber and Lyft and all the companies in the sector. So a lot of observers are not sure how will they recover. And to conclude, this crisis can also open the door to complete new industry that we have not yet thought of. So for example, there is a new industry that is budding right now that is office virus cleaning industries. So companies bought ionizing machines to disinfect large areas. So they would come at night and disinfect your office. Or there are a lot of virtual reality companies that are developing. A lot of museums around the world are trying to go virtual to create tours on virtually online, so people can visit the museum without actually having to go there. And many, many more industries will come in the future. So thank you very much. And if you have any question, I think you can write in the chat.
Yes, thank you so much, Luca. That was really interesting. As he said, we're keeping everyone muted out of precautions, but feel free to write your questions in the chat and either Luca or I will read them out loud. Thank you.
So there is one question around the health industry areas. So labs, hospitals, and nursing homes. First of all, thank you, Marta, for the questions. I'm not an expert. Health industry is a very difficult industry to study, given the situation is like part is private, part is public, part is non-profit. For sure, there has been an increase in demands for professional figures in this industry. So during the pandemic, there's been a higher request for nurses, for even doctors in many countries, but on COVID-related aspects. At the same time, we have witnessed a great decrease in non-urgent surgery, for example. So a lot of people that were scheduled to have surgery for non-life-threatening condition, for example, hip replacement, shoulder replacement, or other minor type of surgery, prefer to postpone because clearly going to the hospital during this time is extremely risky. And this led to a weird situation where on one hand, we were lacking professional figures in the health industry to face the pandemic, but at the same time, there were a lot of professionals like surgeons, doctors that didn't have patients, and in some cases, they were even let off. They were fired or they had to quit because hospitals were not able to pay them since there were not enough surgery being performed. And a similar way in the nursing homes, there have been hotspots for COVID diffusion in many countries around the world. And it came to the forefront the issue of qualification for for the nurses working in these houses, because in many cases they were underqualified or understaffed. And so this could create a problem in the near future because nursing home will be required to hire more qualified professionals, but at the same time, the less qualified professionals that are currently working in this area will have to find a different job. They might be fired unless there is some sort of training and like upgrade in their educational path, we can say. Okay, I don't see any more questions.
No, me neither. If anyone has anything, please type it out. But if not, thank you so much, Luca. And thank you everyone here for coming to our LenZes. We're gonna make sure to give you more Zooms into other disciplines. We're gonna have epidemiology, we're gonna have animal diseases. So just make sure to follow our mail list and see when those events are coming up. If you have any other questions, just feel free to reach out, and this will be posted on our YouTube channel in a couple of days. Thank you, everyone, and I wish you a nice rest of your day.